All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kübra Zengin, and I'm the North America regional lead for Google Developer Groups and Women Techmakers programs at Google.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karina Liu, and I'm also on the North America Developer Ecosystem team at Google, supporting our Google Developer Groups and Women Techmakers. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Elevate with Google Developers. Now, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to know where you're joining from. And with that said, I would like to kick it off with an introduction to Elevate with Google Developers. Elevate is a full-year applied skills program that we are going to host great speakers on a monthly basis on the themes of how to transition to a new career, how to grow your career, and how to grow yourself as a professional. Within those themes, we are going to touch on communication skills, leadership skills, negotiation, and so on. You can check out the website for more information on the schedule and the topics specifically. With every session, you can incorporate your learnings to your professional career and take it to the next level with some workshops and presentations that we will have throughout the year. We are thrilled that you could join us for all of the sessions moving forward, and we hope you all benefit from the content.
Before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. As this is a guideline for all our events, we'd like to remind all of you to be excellent to each other. This is an inclusive event with a zero tolerance for any form of harassment, and we want to continue to provide a safe environment for you to enjoy the learnings. Please follow the community guidelines on our website. Links are also shared here. All the sessions will start with a presentation followed by a Q&A with each speaker. So feel free to start adding your questions during the presentation right in the YouTube chat, and we'll do our best to address them all in a timely manner. And please be mindful of your questions as well. And lastly, if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to us at elevate-team@google.com. All right, now let's get started. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our first speaker of the day. Please join me in welcoming Caitlin Morrissey, who will be sharing more about personal branding. Welcome, Caitlin.
Hello, thanks for having me, Karina and Kubra, and hello everyone. Very excited to be here with you today to talk about personal branding. Hopefully my makeup is doing a good job right now, but you may be able to hear a little bit of a lisp. I got some dental surgery earlier this week, and so bear with me as I go through this presentation, and I will go ahead and jump right on in. So as I mentioned, today I am here to talk with you all about personal branding, or what I like to call the journey towards uncovering your personal brand and communicating it to the world. As I mentioned, my name is Caitlin Morrissey, and I'm a program manager on the Global Women Techmakers team. And I'm really focused on creating innovative learning initiatives and producing events that help all women thrive in tech. And I, again, super happy to be here with you all today. So let's start with the most basic question. What is a personal brand? Just take a second to reflect on that. You may have a definition already in your mind. It might be something that you've just heard occasionally and you're not exactly sure what it is. But just want to take a second to think about, what does this mean to you? As I was doing research for this presentation, and what I have seen over the years in talking to a lot of people about this, is that there are tons of definitions for what a personal brand is. And I'm gonna show two of them to you that I liked especially, and I'll give you a moment to read over those. So in looking through some of these definitions, some I relate to a lot more than others, but what I was really able to see is, to me, it's very clear that there are two key aspects about building your personal brand. The first is the actual brand itself. So the sum of your skills and experience, and then there's actually communicating it out into the world. And so let's look at this first part. This is really all about you. What skills do you have? What are you able to provide? And how can this benefit others? I've highlighted the words here from these two definitions that relate to this aspect. But again, it's this combination of your skills, your experience, your passion. And then I'll also take it a step further and call out that this, as we think about personal branding, one really crucial aspect of this is what you uniquely bring to the table. What makes you stand out from others? This is a really big part in creating your personal brand because, of course, you don't want to blend in. You want to stand out so that the right people can ultimately find you. Let's touch on the second part now, how you are actually conveying that message to others. So it's highlighted just by one word in the first definition here, promoting. So actually broadcasting that brand to the rest of the world. And here the second definition also talks about compelling and attracting the right people. And this really, the second piece, communicating your brand to the world, is just as important as the first. So today we're going to work through both of these steps. But before we get into that, I thought we'd start the day off with a fun little game. Many of you may be familiar with the TV show Mythbusters. It was all about taking common knowledge and trying to see whether or not it was true. And so today we are going to do that with ideas about personal branding. Let's take a look at these statements. I want you can do this in the chat if you'd like, or you can do it on a pen and paper. Look through statements 1 through 4 and just mark whether or not you think these are true or false or a myth. So, not to give it away too early, but some of you may have guessed already that this was a trick question because actually all of these are false or almost fully false, and I'll explain why as we go through them. So the first one here, personal brands are fixed and never changed. While it's true that you definitely want to have consistency in your brand and how your brand is communicated, this doesn't mean that it has to remain the same throughout your entire life. As we grow and we develop, it's likely that our skill set is going to change or what we're passionate about is going to change. And that is completely okay. Sometimes it will be just a little bit, and sometimes it might be super drastically. But here's a more accurate statement. Personal brands can and will change over time as we develop new skills, interests, and passions. Here is the second statement. Personal brands are effortless. I hope you saw through this one at the beginning. This is probably the most false one on our list. And in some ways, I do wish it was a little bit more true because ultimately, when we're thinking about crafting a strong personal brand and conveying that into the world, it's not effortless. It does take a lot of work to build this. If you want to be intentional and set a brand that's really true to you, you really do need to put in some work up front. And that's what we're going to kick off today, but hopefully is something that you will continue to invest in as you go through your own personal journey. Statement number 3, personal brands are passive. So I would say that this one is mostly false, only because we live in an age where our person or who we are is likely already on the internet in some way, shape, or form, even if we're not famous. Even if you've never intentionally worked on conveying your personal brand to the world, it's still likely that your social channels are out there somehow that people can see. There might be articles that have been written about you, maybe from an old newspaper from your hometown. So we do live in this moment where even if we're not intentionally trying to put our brand out there, people can Google us and see what search results come up and form some sort of opinion. However, if we do want to be more intentional about what this is conveying to the world, what the sum of our Google search results are saying about us, we want to actively take charge and maintain this brand through a number of different activities that we'll actually go through today. And then finally, personal brands can be built overnight. Again, we definitely live in an age where people can go viral quite quickly. However, for most of us, probably this won't be the case. And even if it is, we might experience 5 seconds of fame and then the culture moves on to the next meme. But when we're thinking about our personal brand, the only way we can really build a strong, lasting personal brand is to really put our time and energy and effort into this. So again, when we're thinking about our personal brand, there's work involved, but there's also time. We need some time to sit and reflect, and we also need some time to establish this, to make connections, to build our portfolios. And again, we will start in on all of that today. So let's go back to that definition, how you are going to develop and convey your personal brand to the world. As mentioned, it first starts with you. You must ultimately be the one to define your personal brand, although I definitely recommend getting feedback from others around you. That will be really helpful. But the first part of this really does take some authentic reflection on your part. What do you bring to the table? What are you passionate about? Making sure that these two things align, and creating clear and concise focus. And the second part of this piece is about presentation and promotion. How are you going to communicate this out into the world? What mediums will you use? And how can you tell your story in a compelling way? I'll say a quick detour that I wanted to make sure to put in here, because I personally have a little bit of an issue with thinking of myself as a brand. There's something that feels a little bit odd about that, even to me. It's because I really think that as human beings, we're incredibly complex creatures. We have a lot of different interests, a lot of different passions, some of them which might be contradictory and not able to be summed up into one but pretty little bow in a personal statement. And our personalities also might change depending on who we're around, what situation we're in. Those things can all be true. And what I've really understood about creating this brand or this impression, it's kind of another way to think about it, is that even if we are not intentionally, again, going back to that idea of intention, even if we're not intentionally trying to make an impression, we are always making an impression on others. Unless you want to completely remove yourself from the world and live under a rock, everything that we do, working on a project, working with a client, even working, with your team, you are constantly projecting an image into the world, and people are making certain impressions on you based off of that. And that is your brand most simply, really just the impression that others have about you. So if you're concerned about labeling yourself or branding yourself, you can think of this aspect of the impression or the value that you're able to provide and put into the world. So let's start with the first step, authentic reflection. And it really is answering the question, what is your personal brand? And I think that this question is very deceptively simple and is actually very complicated, has a lot of layers, and we're gonna go ahead and break them down and give you some tools to start this reflection. All right, so here are 4 rules. Not the only rules, but just 4 rules that I thought were especially important as we think about the reflection piece before we even jump into doing the reflection itself. Start where you are, be authentic, highlight your uniqueness, and know your audience. All right, so what do I mean when I say start where you are? It's just that. Our personal brand should be a reflection of the skills and experience that we currently have. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your brand can't be aspirational. You can actually use your personal brand to work towards a goal, but it does need to be rooted in some of the skills that you actually possess. So for example, if your brand is built on being a distinguished public speaker, but you actually haven't ever spoken at an event, it's probably a good idea to reflect, realize that maybe you don't have those current skills yet, But it's actually a great way to identify where you want to go, what you should start working on and developing those skills. And so you may then want to temporarily pause on that brand, build up the skills that you have, and get that experience in as well, so that you can more realistically use this as your brand. And remember that your skills really matter. I love this quote because it really hits home to the point of, if you are incredibly good at one thing, you do it really, really well, that will speak for itself. That your reputation alone will be able to carry out that brand that you want to convey to the world. All right, starting next, we're going to talk about being authentic. And I think that starting where you are really begins with being authentic. Being truthful about the skills and values that you have, and also conveying this in a way that feels real and genuine to who you are. Not everybody has to shout from the rooftops about their personal brand or be everywhere. For extroverts, that might be a really exciting part of conveying your personal brand, getting to interact with people and putting your name out there. For introverts, or for anyone who might fall in between there, that can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. And so the idea of a brand is not to change the core of who you are. You can absolutely lean into the strengths and skills that you already have. And you shouldn't feel like you need to change your person in order to have a brand. Recognize truthfully what you're really good at and lean into those strengths, because people can ultimately see through inauthenticity. And if your brand is shaped around something that you're not, like if you are introverted but you're trying to be incredibly extroverted, that's going to cause a lot of hardships for you personally, and might be really hard also to separate who you are, your work persona, and your personal persona. So trying to align those as closely as possible, I think, can be really helpful in establishing your brand and being able to live up to it all the time. So highlight your uniqueness. We kind of touched on this in the beginning, but who you are, your values, your skills, your experience, all of these things come together in a way that is incredibly unique to you. And your personal brand statement is an opportunity to showcase this. When you're crafting your brand statement, which we will get to, you want to ensure that you are highlighting the skills, experience, or things that make you stand out. What is that like unicorn talent that you have? And I want to be clear that this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have tons of impressive awards or world records that you've broken. Maybe you're an incredibly compassionate communicator. Maybe you're really good at connecting others and bringing people together. So you really want to highlight these aspects of your personality. And especially if they're fun and quirky, you can bring that into your brand in ways that still feel professional. And by being authentic with all of this, you can really increase the chances of creating genuine connection with those that you're trying to impress with your skills. Before you can start crafting your personal brand, you really need to determine who you are trying to reach. Who is your target audience with this brand? Is it other people in your industry? Is it leaders in the industry? Is it a specific company that you're potentially trying to work for or work with? Is it recruiters because you're actively looking for a job? It would be pretty impossible to create, in my opinion, to create a personal brand that resonates with every single person in the world without sounding pretty generic. So understanding and targeting your audience and knowing a lot about them, what they care about, where they are, that will really help you narrow your focus and craft a statement that really works for them. And the sooner you define this audience, the easier it will be for you to create a lot of that focus. All right, so let's get tactical. Let's get into it. Today, in the next 20 or so minutes that I have for this presentation before Q&A, we will not, unfortunately, be able to do any of this actual reflection. Again, like I said up front, it is going to take some time and it is going to take some energy and effort. So I recommend over the next couple weeks even to reflect on all of these different things that I'm going to talk through. You will be able to get this presentation afterwards, but feel free to take screenshots or write down anything that is helpful to you as we go through it. So what we're going to be doing here in order to get to that personal brand statement, we're going to start by making a lot of lists. Then we're going to ultimately identify what our focus is. And then we're going to get into actually crafting the statement and some tips and tricks that you can think about when you're doing that. All right, so lists. This is the first step. And I think that this is something that, again, start the list and over the next couple of weeks, you can add to it. But here's the things that I'd like you to reflect on. This by no means are all the questions that you can answer, but these are at least some to get started. So what are you really good at? What are your strengths? And there are actually a lot of online tools that you can use, like StrengthsFinder, or if this is sometimes hard for you to identify exactly what those strengths are, also talking with others can be really helpful to get that feedback around what you do really well. The second one really gets at what you care about. What do you love doing? What gets you excited or what puts you into a state of flow? With this one especially, I think that we can think of those things, that might put us into a state of flow. Maybe it's cooking, maybe it's coding, maybe it's eating even. But it can be helpful too to take note as you go throughout your work week, because there might be smaller tasks that send you into that state of flow. Maybe it's like designing something, maybe it's putting together a presentation. And those are really important things to identify because that can, again, help you understand what you are really interested in, maybe what jobs you might want to work towards, but also in helping you reflect on what you want to showcase in your brand. So the next piece is just about all of the things that you know. What is the knowledge? What are the schools that you've gone to? What are the degrees that you have? What are the online courses that you've taken? What are the certifications that you have? What are the experience that you have? And remember, this can be both professional and personal. You want to bring both of these things in when you're thinking about your personal brand. And then finally, what are your values? What do you truly care about? And I really like the, this one is what about you is unique? What do you uniquely bring to the table? We touched a lot on that. And now the last one is, what are your values? And I think that this is one that can really help you in creating some of that uniqueness, because I think the things that we value, it's going to be different in person to person. And I really like this list of values that is from a workbook based off of the book, The Confidence Gap by Russ Harris. And you can find it online if you just search for workbook, Confidence Gap, Russ Harris. It's a couple pages down. It's a great list of values that you can look through that can give you some inspiration and help you identify what are the things that really drive you, and what are the things that you prioritize in your life. A couple more things to remember when we are making these lists. So hopefully this one goes without saying because we've kind of talked about this, but be real. This should just be for you. You don't necessarily need to have anyone else look over these lists. And it's not an exercise to make yourself look good. So keep it to yourself and be really real about where you currently are. Again, take time on this. This isn't going to be something that can happen even in a couple hours. I think that, again, it does involve some time and time in between you thinking about these things to help you really identify all of the aspects of who you are. And again, remember, your skills matter. So where you currently are, the things that you really excel at, those are super important, and you should really think about highlighting those. And that kind of goes into our second point about focus. When you get done with these lists, it's likely that they are pretty long and contain a lot of different things, right? So all of those different aspects of your personality and what you're super passionate about, what you're interested in. And having all of these things is great. It makes us who we are, but it really can distract from a personal brand statement. If it's all over the place, people don't really know what to take away. So you really want to get focused in these lists. So bringing in the key pieces of each of these lists can be really important in shaping your actual brand statement. So the first thing I think you want to do is cut out the noise. Again, we probably have a lot of different skills, interests, and passions, but we want to focus the list on the things that are most important. And this is something that we can probably see pretty obviously. What are the things that are most relevant to the type of brand that you want to put out into the world? So maybe it's not the things that you're okay at, it's the things that you're great at. It's not the things that you're somewhat passionate about, it's the things you're super passionate about. It's the things that you value the most. So really identify kind of what those most important things are. And again, we're gonna really be focused on using your target audience. So allowing your target audience to also help you from those lists pick the things that you think are going to be most important to them, because you have identified who they are, what they care about, and the types of things that they will want to see from somebody that they're potentially working together with or working for, etc. So again, also, your brand can shift and change. As you develop new skills, find new passions, this can shift. So as you grow and develop, it's always a good idea to look back on these things and take a second to say, you know, what are the true things that matter to me at this moment in time and align with the skills and passions that I have. And then it might be going through this exercise all over again so that you can focus or refocus where your brand is. And so the important part is that you, again, stay true to yourself. I think that that is really important in what you want to convey to the world. And so we can think about, like, an example could be, you know, maybe on this list you have that you really love Settlers of Catan, something you're super passionate about. That's probably not going to be a part of your personal brand, maybe unless you're trying to get a job maybe at a gaming company. But our brands also don't have to always stay narrow. If your brand is really about being a diplomatic and strategic person, when you start talking to other people and you reveal your love for Settlers of Catan, which for people who don't know is a strategic board game, you enhance that brand. And so that's going to get a little bit into when we talk about telling a story. So while you have a narrow focus, these other pieces of your brand can still come in and show themselves, but you ultimately want to have that one really strong statement. So once we've created focus and we've really identified that target audience, the next step is to build this into a cohesive and concise statement, otherwise known as the brand statement. And this you can think of this as your slogan. A lot of times, the best brand statements are things that are attention grabbing and memorable, so keep that in mind. And sometimes you can also have a little bit of intrigue and leave your viewers wanting to know a little bit more. So maybe you pose your brand or part of your brand in a question, and it's a question that you yourself can answer. And especially important about personal brands is that they are very concise and to the point. So utilize words that evoke emotion and hone in on the skills that you really want to showcase and that you know that your audience will be most interested in. All right, so we can use a formula like this. I help blank do blank. I think this is a great way to first get a first draft of your personal brand. The first blank, of course, is the ideal customer, employer, etc. So that is kind of like your target audience right there. Not always your target audience, I guess I should say, especially if your target audience, for example, is recruiters, but that's kind of the core of the person that you are wanting to help in some sort of way. And then the second blank is the result of what you can do. What can you help them achieve? This should be something that they want as well, right? It should be a desired outcome for this identified audience. And this is, I think, the most basic I help blank do blank formula that can help you at least get onto paper. What is that like concise statement? And you, again, want to be as specific as possible and really start here. I would say once you have that down, the next piece I would recommend is actually looking at examples. Examples are your friend. I would try not to get too influenced by examples before you craft that initial statement. And again, it doesn't have to remain in that format. So here's a couple examples that I pulled. I help manufacturing organizations improve their processes to reduce waste and grow profits. So that's pretty specific, right? They're highlighting that it's manufacturing organizations. The outcome is improving processes to grow profits. So I would assume the right type of person would want to say, oh, hey, I'm interested in that. And then here's another example of something that's formatted a little bit differently, but helping you build a big brand with your small business. So that really calls out specifically the target audience there is the small business, and then it's helping to build a big brand. So short, simple, concise. Again, it can be a couple sentences too, and that's maybe where some of your more of that like unique personality can shine through, but would recommend starting with this here. This is definitely a way for you. You can think about it as your elevator pitch. It can be a catchy way to introduce yourself to others. It can be the primary thing that sits on all of your bios. And in the next session, we're going to go into specific ways that you can actually, in the next part of this, we're going to go into specific ways you can communicate that. But remember, it's not everything. There are a lot of other ways that you can convey parts of your personal brand out into the world. So don't get caught up in trying to shove everything into it. It should be at a very high level. What is the most important? And then you can, again, we'll talk about other ways and other mediums you can use to project more of your brand out there. Take your time, build your lists, focus them, try out different wording for your statement, and reflection and time are your best friends in this specific part. So keep all of those things in mind. We're going to jump right into the second piece. And so this is actively communicating this into the world. And again, we want to be really intentional. We want to come up with a plan. So we have our brand. We're very firm in what our brand statement is. And now we're going to talk about how we communicate that. I will give you a second to read over this quote, but it's something that I really like and really connect with. So this quote, I think, is a great summation of the first thing that I'm going to talk about here. It is quite possible that while we might think that we convey a really strong brand into the world, this actually might not be true. We might come off differently than we ultimately intend. At the end of the day, we do want to get to the place where our self-impression, what we think of ourselves, and that brand statement that we have is equal to how others perceive us. And so this is kind of like a equation that we can think of. When these two things are equal, that means that we're doing a really good job of conveying our personal brand out into the world. And again, others is really that target audience. So not everybody necessarily has to have this exact impression, but you really want to make sure that your target audience does. Ways that we can do this. So there's this exercise that you can do. It's called the Johari window. It was invented in the 1950s as a model for mapping personality awareness. And this can actually be a helpful exercise for you to go through so that you can understand more about what you might be missing, what you might not be exposing as much to the world. That would be really helpful, but also how we can improve our interpersonal communication. So bookmark this as something to do at a later time, but this can help you to understand what some of those different aspects, what is visible and what might not be visible currently with your personality. And then Another recommendation, and hopefully this is the most obvious one, is just talk to other people. They will be able to give you the reflection of what you are externally coming off as. And you really want to take that time to understand, is what I'm trying to convey being perceived? And if not, you'll want to take some action. Where might you be missing some certain things? Is there something that you do that comes off a certain way that you never realized and you need to readjust that behavior? So taking what you learn in this step of the active communication, we really ultimately want to get to where these two things, our self-impression and external perception, are equal before we move on to truly communicating it out into the world. So stories are the most powerful and certainly most memorable form of communication that we have. A single statement is great and catchy, but it's really important to have a story about why you are this statement that you're putting out into the world. What made you you? How did you get to where you are today? And our story can really help others understand the full person that we are and offer inroads for connection. So in her article on successful personal brands, Lauren Holiday talked about her impression of a woman who she initially describes, or who she perceived as, another self-help guru with big hair and perfectly concocted outfits. And she said that before she read her story, she just completely tuned her out. She didn't really care what this woman had to say. She sort of wrote her off. But after reading an article about her, she said, the post shared her story about how she got into doing what she does today. Not only did I totally relate to her story, but I also began to see how the dots connected to who she is now. This helped me identify with her and instantly like her. This is why your story is so important. It makes people relate to you and therefore like you. It allows you to explain the why you do what you do. And I thought this was a really great example of why having a story, not just the brand statement, but thinking about our entire story and how we might communicate that out in different ways. So as you're going through that initial exercise too, keep in mind, while the brand statement, again, is that simple, concise thing that you put out into the world, who you are is very multidimensional, and you'll want to have kind of a narrative that you think about and the way that you talk about who you are and what you do. All right, let's get tactical. So we're gonna go through 3 different steps again to talk through some things that I think are super important as you're coming up with a plan to communicate this brand and the story of who you are to the world. We'll start with context and going back to the idea of your target audience or demographic. You want to be conveying your brand to them. They're the ones that matter. Where they are will depend on who they are. So really keep them in mind as you're coming up with this plan of where to communicate, what mediums to use, how to communicate. Big thing first should be your focus, your target audience. Second thing I think is also really important, don't overpromise. Only activate on platforms where you're actually going to be able to stay active on. And with that kind of communication or plan that we're thinking through, consistency is really going to be key. Creating a visual brand is a super easy, a consistent visual brand is a really easy way to convey this consistency, right? A similar profile on all of your a profile picture on all of your different platforms, a personal website that has a look and feel of the type of thing that you do and want to convey. And so you could even consider, if that's something that you want some help with, consider hiring a designer to help with that, because visuals do a lot for everyone. You know, we're very drawn to visuals. And then personal branding isn't really a set it and forget it type of thing. Once you've figured out what your message is and how you want to convey it, you're going to need to start posting consistently. And one of the best parts of being able to do this on the internet is that you can schedule posts so that you don't necessarily always have to be so plugged in, but you don't want to have long periods of radio silence if you're trying to be really big on Twitter, or you're wanting to blog consistently, or whatever it might be. Think about a schedule where you can be consistent, and it can still allow you to take breaks, again, by utilizing things like scheduling posts, having guest authors, all different ways that you can kind of take that burden off of yourself can also be really helpful in keeping you consistent. And play to your strengths. So we kind of touched a bit on this, but there are so many platforms out there. If you love long form written content, a blog could be the perfect place for you to express more of your brand. If you're quick, witty, like things really short and sweet, Twitter might be a great avenue. Again, as long as your target audience is going to be there. And then finally, once you've built out your brand, don't be afraid to self-promote. And I think that this is something that can trip a lot of people up. You don't want to seem too pompous or too like you're so self-involved and don't care about others. But building a good brand and a strong reputation is really going to be best achieved by you having confidence in yourself and being able to convince others of your brand. And bringing others along in this vision is really important. So if you might need some practice in confidence, I definitely recommend doing that and taking those steps to get more confident and really own your brand statement. All right, for the sake of time, we're only going to touch on 2 mediums that you can utilize in conveying your brand to the world. Having a personal website or portfolio, and then we'll touch on some social platforms. Remember to follow your target audience. So some of these might be more or less relevant to you, and this is definitely not where the mediums start. The internet is super, super vast, and so this is just a recommendation of some of the more common things that you can potentially think through. So, personal website. This is a great way to expand on your personal statement and really tell your story. It has more space to let your personality shine, but you really want to ultimately make sure it's super organized so that people can find exactly what it is that they're looking for. What is your brand statement promise? How can they find that as quickly as possible? So some things that you might want to include. Example projects, reports. It's kind of thinking about your portfolio. You could put the logos of companies or brands that you've previously worked with. You could have testimonials from happy customers or partners that you've worked with. You can have a customized URL and email address. And all of these things, you may need to modify depending on where your expertise lies. Again, I think examples are your friend. Look at what other people in your field are doing. Or, if other people maybe don't have a website, that could be an indication that might be not the most effective way to convey your brand. So always keep that in mind as well. Let's talk about social channels. So there are, as you see, these are just a handful of some of the social channels that we can use to convey our brand. I'm just going to talk through LinkedIn and Twitter, again, for the sake of time. All of the kind of best practices around how to build a strong profile in all of these are all over the internet. There are tons of experts who are sharing how they do things well on these platforms. So I would definitely recommend checking all of that out. When we think about LinkedIn though, typically this is the place where you want to have a really strong profile for recruiters or other people in your field. Maybe it's people that you want to be raising money. Maybe it's potential investors. Maybe it's, like I said, recruiters. But you really want to focus on industry skills. When people are searching for things, they're using very specific words. So make sure that those words related to your industry or whatever it is that you are focused on are in your profile and in your profile a lot. Quantify your accomplishments. So anytime that you can put a number to something, put that there. Don't overwhelm with tons and tons of data. Make sure it's the strongest pieces of data that you're putting there. Whether it's, number of articles you've written, dollars that you've raised, always include data if you can. And again, if it's strong. And then make it well-rounded. So there are multiple sections in your LinkedIn profile. you can use them, again, to let more of your personality and different aspects of who you are really shine through. Twitter. You can really leverage this platform to highlight and build upon your industry expertise. Try to incorporate your personal brand into your Twitter bio. You can use hashtags as well to help other people find you. So understanding when is the right time to use hashtags, not necessarily all the time. And then really Twitter is a great way to let your personality shine. And don't forget though, what you ultimately tweet is a part of your online portfolio. You know, people will be able to see everything that is on any of these social platforms ultimately, unless they are private. So be really intentional about the types of information that you're putting there. And of course, this is not all. There are many other platforms you should consider in building your brand, dictated by where your target audience is: YouTube, Stack Overflow, Reddit, just to name a few. And remember, you don't need to be everywhere. You just want to be on the platforms that matter most to your audience. And creating a really strong plan around this will help you invest your energy and effort into what matters most. All right. Finally, networking. Probably everyone's either exciting part or maybe least exciting part of building a brand. I recognize that networking does not always feel comfortable and come easy, but it is a super important part of building our brand and making connections. So first thing I want to mention, don't overlook your current network. The people that you have done work with before, or have partnered with on something, you can use them to identify, maybe they know other people who are looking for the type of work that you can do. Maybe they would be happy to write a testimonial for you. So it's not always about expansion, but rather, where are you currently? Take stock of that before moving into the next phase of identifying even more people that are out there. And it's not always the amount of connections that we have. Having a lot of connections, I think, can be very helpful because you never know where a new business partner or a new opportunity might come from. But ultimately, when we think about our personal brand, or when we think about networking, we want to be targeted, especially if networking is not always the most fun. We want it to be targeted. So the one benefit to the virtual world that we're currently all in is that you do have the potential to meet more people, and more people in your specific niche. So I'd really recommend that when you're looking for virtual networking events, look for like-minded people, look for your target audience, look for people that you are ultimately looking to make connections with, because there are a lot of very niche networking opportunities out there right now that I would say are really effective in building up your audience. Finally, don't be afraid of a cold outreach. You can definitely do this. Some people may respond, some people may not, but a couple things to keep in mind if you do want to do a cold outreach to someone is to do your research and show that up front, and recognize why you're reaching out to them. What about them really stands out to you that you really admire? Flattery is great at the beginning. Don't overdo it, but show that you know who they are, and this is not just a templatized email. Make it super clear what you want from them. Put that right up front as well, so that they know very clearly what they need to say yes or no to. Don't put it in the middle of something, just, whether it's bold in its own line, make that super clear so that they can very quickly give you a thumbs up, and then potentially offer them something in return. What could you offer them? It doesn't need to be something massive, but thinking about your own brand and what you might uniquely be able to offer. Maybe it's a little bit of free design work. Maybe it's help staffing an event, whatever that might be. It can always be helpful to add in a little bit of something extra for them. And this quote, I think, sums up a lot of the things that we talked about today. Because at the end of the day, people connect with people, not brands or concepts. And if you can create strong connections, you can make an impact, you can ultimately be missed, or others might call it creating a legacy, you are definitely on the right track for your personal brand. So, practice makes perfect is a cliche for a reason. Building a personal brand might feel uncomfortable, difficult at first, but the more that we practice this, the more that we get comfortable with talking about ourselves, talking about the things that we do well, talking about the value that we can provide to others, the less uncomfortable and more comfortable it will feel, because like any muscle that you exercise, things will get stronger the more you do it. All right, and a personal brand ultimately is a lifelong project. It's going to evolve and change. Even the experts who build or enhance the biggest brands and in business know that there are no hard and fast rules towards identifying the perfect personal brand and keeping it forever. But these are general guidelines and steps that can help you get to a personal brand statement and a communication plan that works for you. So we talked about this authentic reflection, the steps that we need to do, starting where you are, being authentic, knowing your audience, and showcasing your uniqueness, all in effort of building that personal brand statement. And again, thinking about that narrative, that story that you can tell. And then actively communicating this into the world. You want to present yourself to the world. You can do that by making sure that your external perception is the same as your self-perception, and really using that bigger narrative to tell a story and help create a memorable impression for people. And creating a personal brand will not only help you be known in your field and consistently land work, but it could be the difference between who are you versus thank you for being here in your career. And with that, I will say thank you to everyone and open it up, I believe, to some questions.
All right. Thanks, Caitlin. That was really, really informative. Thanks for guiding us through on the things that we should focus on as we're developing our own personal brands. So now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of the session. We'll start off with some of the questions that you have already asked in the chat, and then we'll open it up for additional questions. So the first one we have is, what is your personal brand story, Caitlin?
Thank you for this question, Marta. So concisely, I kind of stated up front about my personal brand in that I work on the Women Techmakers team, and I am all about creating innovative learning initiatives and producing events to help women thrive in tech. So that's kind of my brand statement. My personal story is a little bit more meandered than that. I have always been passionate about helping women specifically. I started Google almost right out of college and started in the ads world. Knew that that wasn't really where I wanted to stay, but wanted to get my foot in the door. I moved over to the YouTube side where I really got to work personally with YouTube creators, and that was really fun getting to live vicariously through their creativity. But one of the things that really stood out to me as I worked with YouTube creators was that women had such a harder time both creating content and dealing with a lot of hate and harassment. Those two things kind of went together. And so I really started shifting my focus in any little way that I could, working with more women creators, partnering with other teams who were interested in doing research around why women weren't posting as frequently. And this sort of moved me into an event space where I got to produce events for all YouTube creators, but got a specific focus on women creators. And that ultimately led me, that experience with producing events and really understanding how we can empower more female creators got me into my current role with the Women Techmakers team, where I've been for the past year and a half. And I could go into a lot more about how COVID has affected all of this and the challenges that, especially in the event space, for anybody else who works on events, you know how hard it's been. But I would also say that the challenges that I've faced over this past year have also really helped grow and stretch me, getting more comfortable with ambiguity, taking on new challenges, and ultimately getting to participate in more events like this where I can, just be here in my kitchen and be talking to you all.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think with the pandemic and the challenges came with that, it really showed how resilient we all are. All right, next question. Why is having a personal brand necessary or important? That's coming from Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah. So I think, the important thing that I think about, because that was a very shortened version of everything. And again, I think that I'm a lot more than just that story. But at the same time, whether we like it or not, we are making an impression on all of the people that we are around. So even if you are, you're at a company, you really like the work that you do, you don't really feel the need, you don't need to raise money, you don't need to, find a new job, you're really happy where you are, you're still creating an impression on the people that you work with, right? They're judging you ultimately off of how you interact with them. What is the work that you produce? And so I think that when we're even thinking about that at a very small scale, still having that brand and being intentional about it is important, so that you can, first of all, make sure that you're conveying the right thing, so that you are in that place where your external, what people think of you externally and what you think of yourself are matched up. But also, in identifying for yourself, what are those things that you really truly care about and are passionate about and want to do more of, can even help you within your company to get more opportunities like that. If you're really known for being great at X, Y, or Z, it's likely that you're going to attract more opportunities to do X, Y, or Z. So I think at a very basic level, it is about, again, that impression that we're giving off, and ultimately just being intentional about that impression, making sure that it's the right impression that we're trying to give.
Yeah, really agree with that too. Next question from Mohammed. What are strategies to ensure we are on the right track for personal branding and build a good reputation?
This one, I think, Mohammed, is a point where we need to ask for a lot of feedback. And so, again, I think it's great to start with the people that you're closest to, because they're ultimately going to give you, I think, the most realistic interpretation of how you present yourself into the world. But it's important too to get, different. Don't just go off of one person's impression, of course, like ask around to a few people. That can be, people in your personal life, but I would also recommend with coworkers or a manager or someone that you've worked with, getting that feedback and hearing from them specifically around what they think your strengths are, if they would want to work with you more, if so, why, if not, why not? So I think it really starts with asking others and asking other people. If we're also, thinking about, depending again on the ultimate end goal for you, I would say, like, if you are trying to attract new customers and you don't, you've put in the work, you've done this, you feel like you've been doing all of the different steps and you're not getting new customers, or you're not getting a job, or you're not getting the funding, you may want to look and try and evaluate, am I really doing this the right way? Am I on the right platforms? Am I networking with the right people? Am I asking the right questions? So I think that there's that, as you think about it more broadly, if you are ultimately achieving the goal, that is probably a good indication that you're on the right track. But again, continually asking for feedback, I think, is something that will be really helpful and keep you also accountable for, again, how you're acting in the world and making sure that's aligning with your brand. And, maybe it's also that you might have the wrong interpretation of what is truly the most, valuable thing, or the thing that you really bring to the table. So you may need to do some analysis both on, the brand statement, those exercises that you did, and also how you're communicating that into the world.
Thanks, Caitlin. And I also want to be mindful of the time, as we do have another session on technical writing right after this. So we'll just do one more question live on Q&A, but Caitlin will be able to answer some of your questions just in the chat. That works. All
Yeah.
right. So coming from Il Friday, how can you be authentic while trying to sell yourself to a specific audience? Crafting a statement towards what your audience wants to hear seems inherently inauthentic. Sorry to be skeptical.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And it's definitely not my most comfortable space either. And I think that that's when it really helps if this is something that is harder for you. You know, some people are, I'm so impressed with how well they can sell something and make it look effortless and make it seem really authentic. And I think they're just born with that. I think for some of us that can feel not as natural. And so I think that one of the things that can be really helpful for you, hopefully, is just practicing, finding ways or using language that feels less salesy and more just talking about who you are and what you do. Again, creating that kind of connection. I think if you're thinking about it more of like, how can I create a connection with this audience? How can I get them to like me, trust me, respect me because of these things that I'm telling about myself? And then how can I then show that what I have to offer is going to be of a value to them? If we can kind of think about it in this way, I think that that can be helpful, so that it doesn't come off as feeling like, oh, I'm trying to pitch them on something they don't want or need. You've done your research. You know that this audience could benefit from using you. And it's kind of your just however you want to do this, your opportunity to tell them how what you do benefits them. I think in centering them and creating a relationship with them is really, really helpful. And then also, you know, if you are super, super good at something, again, that kind of will speak for itself. Your work can ultimately speak for itself. And so having that like niche specific thing that you are really good at will also help you yourself do less of the selling and your work speak for you. In a really quick way, that's how I'd answer that. Probably have more thoughts on it, but hopefully that was helpful.
Great. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Well, that concludes our live Q&A. As mentioned, Caitlin can also respond to some of the questions that are asked within the YouTube chat. We hope you all found this personal branding session very helpful and also encouraging you to, as you start to build your own personal brand too, and giving some tips and guidance around that. All right, now let's give a warm welcome to our next speaker, Shawnique Warren. She'll be sharing how you can make the move into a career path in technical writing. Let's welcome Shawnique.
Welcome to another one of our Google Developer Elevate training sessions. In this session, we'll be talking about how you can transition into the wonderful world of technical writing. So get comfy, grab a pen, paper, tablet, laptop, whatever it is you like to take notes with, and let's chat. Before we get into the presentation though, I want to share a story with you. A story I know very well. My story. The journey of my path into technical writing. So many moons ago, and I do mean many, I graduated from university with a bachelor's degree in molecular biology and botany. While reviewing my next steps, I spent a few years as a teacher at a local high school. At that time, I had great aspirations of spending the rest of my life in a laboratory unraveling the mysteries of the human genome. During my research, I came upon a fast-moving trend in that space where they were using software to dissect and analyze huge datasets such as genomes, a field known as bioinformatics. But I had one major issue. I knew nothing about computers and especially nothing about programming. So I enrolled in a 2-year programming diploma, and while doing that, I decided, let me get some real-world experiences, and that's how I landed my first internship as a technical writer. I enjoyed that experience so much that I went back to school, finished my programming diploma, completed a postgraduate certificate in technical communications, and did a few more internships, and eventually landed my first role as a full-time technical writer. 5 years later, I'm still in the field. I started with this story for 2 main reasons. One, I wanted to take note of the winding path of my journey so far. This is typical of most technical writers. And so if you find yourself right now in that winding path, you're in great company. Second reason is that when you're moving into a new space, it's important that you can visualize or see yourself in that space. And so, to help you with that, I'll give you your own chart. So go ahead, get a nice photo of yourself, plop it in the corner, add your credentials. In the other little bubbles, fill out your experiences so far, and then designate one bubble where we're going to put technical writer ? And then we're going to keep that visual in our mind as we move through the rest of the presentation. So before we get started, I'd love to give you an overview of what we'll talk about today. So in today's presentation, I'm going to cover what does a technical writer do, what are the job prospects, the basic entry requirements to get into this field. I'll touch a bit on the day in the life of a technical writer, and then I'll give you a transition plan that you might use. And then I'll wrap up by talking briefly about what technical writing interviews are like, give you a few tips, and then wrap up with some resources. So let's get started. So what does a technical writer do? Technical writers explain complex or technical information in a clear, concise, or accurate manner to an audience or end user that is generally not so familiar with this content. I chose this simple definition for technical writing because technical writers work across a variety of industries, companies, teams, and so their role changes based on that. But this simple definition captures the basic essence of what technical writers do. So then you might ask, what are the job prospects of such a role? Well, let me give you some data. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the employment of technical writers is expected to grow at a rate of 7% between 2019 and 2029. This is going to be driven by the expansion of scientific and technical products, as well as an increase in the need for more web-based support. Now, I want you to take note of one thing on this slide, the date. This information was released in September of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. So that means even in the pandemic, this role shows positive job growth. And you might be asking, will this stay the same post-pandemic? Well, we do expect that this momentum of expansion in scientific and technical products will continue. And so as companies ramp up, the need for user empowerment is going to become critical. And one way to empower your end users and increase adoption is by providing them with clear, concise, and accurate communication. So who you think they're going to call? You got it, tech writers. So now that I've given you the prospects, you might be wondering, okay, prospects looking good. What about the entry requirements? What do I need to become a technical writer? So here we go. The basic requirement for transitioning into this field is a bachelor's degree. If you have a master's or PhD or some other professional accreditation, that's great too. But then you might ask, which bachelor's? And my answer, any. Seriously, any bachelor's degree will work for this field. And if you don't believe me, check out these sources. The first one I'll give you is the Google Technical Writing website. From there, we have a page with some profiles of a few of our technical writers. I want you to take a moment and look at the various backgrounds that they are coming from. The next example I'll give you is from the Society for Technical Communication. They have a publication known as the Intercom, and in 2019, they did a study of the demographics and backgrounds for those who hold the role of technical writer. So then you might say to me, hey, if the basic requirement is a bachelor's degree, what is it that makes some people a bit more successful in transitioning into technical writing or, progressing in that career? Well, the answer lies in a simple formula. At the beginning of this presentation, the slide said I was going to talk about how you can transition to technical writing. But I don't know how many of you noticed that at the bottom of the slide, I had force equal mass times acceleration. You might have wondered, was that a typo? Well, no. For those of you who remember your high school physics, force equals mass times acceleration was actually Newton's second law of motion. Now I know you're wondering, what does physics and Newton's second law have to do with technical writing? Well, hear me out. Physics is the study of the behavior and motion of matter through time and space. Aren't we just matter here, moving through time and space? So wouldn't the law of physics apply to us? Anyway, let me show you where I'm going with this. So, Newton's second law of motion goes something like this. I'll give you a quick reminder. Force is proportional to what is required for an object of constant mass to change its velocity. Now, a change in velocity is what we call your acceleration. Now, earlier, I told you that the basic requirement to get into this field is a bachelor's degree. So we can look at our bachelor's degree as our object of constant mass, since all degrees are weighted equally. So then, in order to be successful, impactful, to have force, then we need something that helps us to change our velocity or accelerate. And that is what we have identified as some key traits of the most successful technical writers. Here they are. You're resourceful, you're empathetic, you're curious, flexible, and you have good communication skills. So if I was to ask someone to describe you, would they use any of these words or synonyms of them? Think about that. If yes, then you're in the right place. If not, then think about how you can improve it. However, while you're applying for jobs and on your resume or in your application package, you might get away with just jotting down these words. However, at your interview, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate them. So that's the first piece of assignment I'm going to give you. Think about how you can demonstrate these key attributes using your life experiences. I don't know how many of you have been on TikTok or Instagram lately. There's this new challenge out there that says something like, tell me you're happy without actually saying you're happy. I want you to do that here. That's my challenge for you. Find ways that you can demonstrate these characteristics without actually saying it. All right. Next, I'll talk briefly about what a day in the life is like. Now, disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. There is no such thing as a typical day as a technical writer. This varies, again, by industry, company, team, role, day, down to minutes, what you're working on. But what I've identified here are 3 key areas that we tend to focus on. So, as a tech writer, you're going to learn, collaborate, and write throughout your day. Now, the examples, the specifics of each bucket, whether you're doing learning, collaborating, or writing, will vary based on the industry again, or company, etc. So the specifics that I have here are loosely based on my life as a technical writer in a software development or software engineering space. And so you notice that my learning looks a lot like reading product design documents, user studies. My collaboration, I have a specific teams that we collaborate with. For example, in my space, it would be software developers, UX, UXR, testers, support team. And then my writing tends to be those end user guides that help people to understand the software. However, this might look different in other industries. But what I wanted to highlight here on this page is based on your background. I want to show you that there's something here for you. The learning. If you're someone with high technical aptitude, you like to solve problems, you will pretty much love that part of the job. If you're just a people person and just like working with others and you have great communication skills, then you'll love the collaboration. And if you just want to get down to it and help people by giving them content that helps them to be successful at what they're doing, then you'll love the writing part. As one of my teammates recently said to me, successful technical writer is someone who combines the curiosity and resourcefulness, remember from our previous slide, of a journalist with the empathy and flexibility of a teacher, all wrapped in great communication skills. And on any particular day, you'll feel just like that, like you're going from one role to the next. So if that's something you would like, well, you're in the right place. So let's continue. So now I'll talk a bit about a plan that you could use as you're trying to transition into this field. The first thing I'd advise you to do is to do some self-introspection. Really know yourself. Figure out first of all, write down all your experiences that you've had so far that you can use to demonstrate the key attributes that we talked on earlier. And then also really assess yourself. Think about what I told you in the previous slide about what a day in the life would this be something that suits you? Think about the prospects of the job, right? And really make that decision if this is something that appeals to you. If your answer is yes, then we'll go to the next phase, which is your research phase. In this phase, what I advise you to do is to really take stock of where you are. So technical writing requires that you have a good blend of technical skills with communication skills. If you have that nice blend, great. If you don't worry, there are still ways to improve that. So if you come from a strong, say, writing background, but you have not really dealt with a lot of technical content, then you might want to look in ways that you can find programs or courses that help you to fill that gap. And it's the same if you have a strong technical background, but not so much on the writing side, you need to look into programs to help you in that space. One thing I'd recommend is that there are a few technical writing diplomas, master's programs out there that you can look into, but you don't have to take a full course. You can curate your own experiences. As I said, if you've done the proper self-introspection, you'll know where your gaps are and you can target them specifically. Another thing that you would need to do is be able to demonstrate this. So it's great if you think you have a good blend of the technical and the writing skills, but you're going to have to be able to show it. And so for that, one way you can be able to show this is through projects or past experiences. Now, if you are currently employed, but you're not in a space that you think is technical writing, you can still find ways to incorporate that into your day-to-day life so you can use it to build out your portfolio in the next step. How you can do that is, say you're working in finance at a bank and there are certain processes that take place. You can volunteer to document them and then watch your document in action as people interact with it and use it. You can improve it and track your process. These are going to become important things when you get around to the implementation phase. Another thing you could look at is especially if you don't have a lot of experiences in technical spaces, is that you can contribute to open source projects. For example, you have a platform such as GitHub that has a ton of open source projects there. However, a few of them might just be lacking, as I would say, in documentation quality. You can volunteer there to use your skills as a writer to improve their content, and at the same time, you're building out your portfolio. Another thing I want you to do in this research phase is think about your network. Think about the industry you want to go in as a tech writer. Is it aerospace, pharmaceuticals, software engineering? Start making the right connections in these spaces. And then the final thing I'd ask you to do in this research phase is to gather some job postings. This is going to become important because it's through job postings that you're going to learn what the ask is currently on the market. Because, a few years ago, the tech writing position was aimed at they were looking for different skills, qualities, tools, but as things evolve, so does the profession, right? So let's collect some job postings to see what the market is like today. After you've done that, the next phase is for you to plan. So create a timeline for yourself, some start and end dates of when you're going to do these projects, courses, tasks, whatever it is that you're building up your portfolio with, and make sure you stick to that plan. The next phase is to implement your plan. So in this phase, what you're going to do is build out that portfolio, right? So you've taken some new programs or courses, you have some new experiences, you have some new projects. We're going to build out our portfolio with that because that is key. That is something you're going to need on your resume, right? And your portfolio could be simple as a drive that you keep a few projects, a few writing samples in, nothing fancy. Or if you want, you can create your own website that demonstrates your skills. This is also the phase where you take those courses, right? One of the advantages too of taking a technical communication or technical writing course is that they tend to have like a capstone project or a internship that gives you those opportunities that you can use to build out your portfolio. But again, if that's not the option you've taken, then you can still build them out using your own experiences or collection of open source projects that you contribute to. The other thing is to get familiar with the tools of the trade. Technical writing, like any profession, we have our own tools. So from tools that we use to write, edit, publish, manage our content. So get familiar with those tools. And again, those will vary by industry. Revamp your resume at this stage. So a technical writing resume One of the key things you have to have there is your portfolio attached somewhere to your resume. Have a link to your drive with your writing samples or your website, because that's one of the key things we're going to be assessing. And another thing you want to do is think about preparing yourself for tech writing interviews. And in the next few slides, I'll give you a few tips. After you finish this phase, then we're ready to deliver. So this is the phase, the easy phase. You just go out there, you apply to those jobs, you ace that interview, and you become a full-time tech writer. However, if you are not successful on this first run, the reason I gave you this in a circle is because all you have to do then is go back into self-introspection phase. Think about what areas you can improve now. You've just done one run, hopefully you've gotten some great feedback, and then you can improve and try again. The key, iterate, okay? So keep at it until you are successful. All right, so in the next few slides, I'll talk a bit about what a technical writing interview might entail, and then give you a few tips around how you might navigate this. So technical writing interviews tend to focus on the following areas. First, writing quality and user focus. This is assessed either through your writing samples that you provided, remember your portfolio, or a live writing exercise. Here they will assess if your writing is clear, concise, and accurate. And most importantly, where does the user fall into your story? Are they at the center or are they an afterthought? Next, they'll assess your project management and approach to writing. How do you deal with competing projects and deadlines? Is there a process to your writing? All this you would get from past experiences or by working on your projects in the previous phase. The next thing they'll assess is your technical aptitude and problem solving. Here, they might give you a scenario and have you walk them through how you would solve it. Or they might just ask you, how do you deal with difficult people, difficult situations, complex problems? The key thing here is that there are no right or wrong answers. They just want to know what your process is and how effective it is. And then they might look at your communication, work practices, and leadership skills. Well, communication, that's a given. Your work practices, how well do you work with others? And do you have an approach to your workday? And the other one, leadership. Now, leadership, this is what trips up a lot of us. We think that leadership is a title. And you'll hear a lot of people say, hey, I've never really had any leadership positions before. Leadership is not a title, it's an attribute. Here's my definition of leadership. Leadership, a leader is a visionary, someone who can see an opportunity and then take that opportunity and convert it into actionable goals. Once they have that, they inspire others to be engaged with them in accomplishing these goals. And most importantly, at the end of this, everyone that works with them on achieving those goals should walk away with a success story. Have you ever been that person? Well, there is your leadership experience. Talk about it. First thing, ask clarifying questions. Learn to tease out information from others. This is not a speed Q&A round. Get as much information as you can before answering the question. Remember, you're demonstrating your skills as a tech writer who's curious and resourceful. Next, expect questions about your writing process and how you manage projects. Be prepared for a live writing exercise. These are becoming pretty popular these days, so have a mental checklist of a process or approach for this. Be prepared to talk about your writing samples. Don't just attach them to your resume or application and forget about it. Remind yourselves a few days prior to the interview why you wrote it, how you were assessing the quality of your document, how effective it is. You might want to look at the views that it had if it was public content, and be prepared to talk about that. The next two tips that I'll give you are really, they're not as general as the first four, but I thought I'd drop them in. Be prepared to talk about publishing tools. Now, this will probably depend on the industry that you're going into. For smaller companies where the writing department is smaller and you will have to own the entire writing process, you will have to know a lot about your writing, editing, publishing tools, and content management. However, for most bigger companies where these entire departments are dedicated to this, you might not be tested on this. The other thing is be prepared to interpret code sample. Again, this is more common in areas where you're going for a technical writing position on a software engineering or software development team. So you might be wondering, how do I know when to be prepared to talk about publishing tools and to interpret source code? I'm going to put up a few job postings and show you how you might be able to determine this. So here we have our first posting. If you look at this, they're looking for a technical writer in what they call hardware operations. If you noticed, there's nothing here that talks about publishing tools or code sample. So if I'm going in for an interview for this position, I might say to myself, just preparing myself for the four first areas that we discussed there should work. If I was going after this posting here, in this section, you see I've highlighted that they're asking that you have in-depth knowledge of publishing tools such as Confluence, and they want you to have experience in the Adobe suite of FrameMaker, Illustrator, RoboHelp, PhotoHelp, content management systems, and data. See, in this kind of job, if you're going for that interview, make sure you're prepared to talk about the publishing tools. And this is another reason too why I told you to gather those job postings in your early planning phase, because they give you an idea of the different types of things you're expected to have in your experiences, your skill set, as well as be prepared for on the day of the interview. All right, so I'll give you one more posting. In this one, you notice a difference now. You're a technical writer on a software engineering or software development team. And you notice they have asked that you have the ability to read and understand code written in C++, Python, and JavaScript. So this is the interview that you have to turn up, being prepared to interpret a code sample. Now here, it's not that you need to be able to write code, but just be able to read it, understand what it's doing. And in some cases, you might want to go a little step further. And if that's your thing, tell them how you think it could be improved. And don't worry, they're not going to give you they're not going to test you on all three in cases like this. They'll probably say to you on the day of the interview, I have the same code sample in C++, Python, and JavaScript. Which one do you have the most level of comfort in, right? So in that case, so just make sure you know one of these languages, fairly well. All right, so now we'll wrap up with a few resources that you can use as you're going through your resource gathering, implementation, and delivery phase. The first one I'll give you is Season of Docs. This is an initiative by Google where we're looking to pair technical writers who are looking for experience with open source projects that need some improvement in their documentation. So this is a great area for you to get some, this is a great project, something to build out your projects and your portfolio. So I'd advise you look into that. And even if it doesn't work for you, there's so much you can learn from just looking through the processes that they're using there. The other resource I'll give you is the Google Technical Writing site. And that's at google.com/techwriting. And here we have a few resources such as a collection of courses, introductory courses to technical writing, resources such as templates, style guides that can help you prepare your portfolio, and other interesting information about what it's like being a technical writer here at Google, if that sort of stuff interests you. And then finally, I'll give you some resources that you can use for your networking, because networking is a big part of your success into transition into any field. And the first resource I'll give you is Write the Docs. And so writethedocs.org is their site, and they advertise themselves as a community of writers, developers, project managers, and anyone else who cares about documentation. The nice thing about Write the Docs is that they have local meetups in various cities, and it's a great opportunity for you to meet with others in the space the industry that you're thinking about going into, and start making those nice connections. The same for the Society for Technical Communication. This is more of a professional association for anyone who works in what we call technical communication, which includes tech writers, and they have meetups as well, local chapters, great again for building out your network. Thank you for tuning in, and I do hope you find this information useful as you make your transition into the field of technical writing. I wish you all the best on your journey. Take care.
All right. Thank you, Shawnique. Those are some great insights and tips for navigating into a career into technical writing. Thanks for sharing. Now, let's jump into the Q&A with the questions directly from the chat. So the first one's coming from Jeffrey. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing, but they're asking how good I should be with programming languages to work as a technical writer for software products.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for your question. I hope I'm coming across clearly. I didn't test my mic. But yeah, so how good should I be? Okay, sorry about that. So in terms of programming languages, here's where I will take it. You just need to have a good general understanding. So any kind of introductory courses to programming. So for example, you would pick a single language. I get that a lot. It's like, do I need to know all the languages? So no, pick one of the popular ones. I would say right now on the market, Python and Java are really hot. So pick one of those popular programming languages and just do an introductory level. As a tech writer, we just want to know that you can at least read the code, have an idea of what it's doing. Oh, those are variables. Oh, that's the process. There's some iteration there with that loop. Have an understanding of what it's doing, be able to understand the indentations of the language, right? So that if you have to put sample code into your documentation, you're comfortable enough to at least see an error. If a developer gives you a piece of code that it's not properly formatted, or it's not complete, you can see that at a first glance, right? Or if you have to contribute, there are times where you have to contribute to documentation. Your documentation lives the same place where the code is, and you have to go in there and edit your content and not mess up the code. So if you didn't know something like how indentation works in that programming language, you could go in, you're fixing a small typo, but then you ended up introducing an indentation in the code that might get missed by their testings that are run on the thing before you submit it. It might get missed. There are errors in everything, and another user might not see it because it's just an indentation. And then it's like 2 days later when the system goes down, you realize, oh, that must have been that typo that I fixed, right? So it's more for like having familiar enough with the code that you can see what it's doing and be able to incorporate it into your content. You don't need to be able to write code and optimize code and all of that. So nothing past like an introductory course is necessary. I hope I answered that.
All right. Next question is coming from Ayash. Are there any free online certifications Google offers for learners? And if so, can you share the program name?
Sure. So on that, I think it was like the second to last slide, there was the Google technical writing website. That is a starting place. I'll probably just drop the link in the chat. I was trying to get into the chat with you all earlier. So that's a great resource. You can start. There are 2 courses on there that I think Technical Writing 101 or 102. They're just really very basic introductory courses. So for some folks, if you have any experience, you might find it basic, but it could be a good refresher as well. So there are those courses. Anywhere else online. So I think that's all we have, but you can always still like scope out on other platforms that have learnings, right? Other learning platforms for free courses around. And it doesn't have to say tech writing. It could be like, sometimes they have different names like professional writing. It's for you to go through the objectives. So the key thing is, especially if you're trying to curate your own experience without going through an accredited program, or as they call it, you could just like look at a few courses on these different platforms and assess what they said at the end of this course you should be able to do, and see if that fits into what you're trying to accomplish. Because sometimes the namings vary so much that you don't, it's not easy to say, oh, this can really help me as a tech writer. So yeah, I would just go on and look for courses. And also your local universities and colleges, they might have, it doesn't have to be a full degree, like a postgraduate diploma or certificate that might not be as expensive as the other things. Definitely look into those as well.
Coming from Pratam, how efficient can we run DDLC in Agile Scrum environment?
So the last time I did Scrum, I was in an Agile environment, was at my last job. So all these things are, as I would say, it's more, you're getting into the details of the processes, and it's dependent on the company, right? And so if I said to be a better technical writer, the processes will vary. So in some environments, if the development team is using an agile thing, the writers would have a matching development process in that way. And then you can optimize for that. But this varies by company. For example, right now, I don't really work in an agile environment, so we're not doing this type of work, but I remember doing that at my previous job. And yeah, efficiency in anything, as I said, it's pretty much, I would say, trial and error when it comes to any of these things. And so I don't think there's a standardized way around how you would effectively manage your documentation process in Agile. I would just say it depends on matching it to the development. For me, that's what I found most effective when I was working in this area, is try not to make your documentation process, your process, different from the Agile process that's being used by the other team. Integration at all phases is critical. And so I always model mine a bit of theirs while ensuring that, I give room for documentation development and testing, because ours sometimes, their cycles and ours don't match up, because they will have strong development cycles where there's nothing really to document at that phase, right? So you plan around that. So yeah, that's pretty much my advice there on efficiency in an agile environment. Yeah.
Hope that answers your question, Pratam.
Oh.
What is Season of Docs website? That's coming from Milan.
I missed the Season of Docs. So it should still be google.com/Season of Docs. It should be in the slide. So it's developers.google.com/Season of Docs with an hyphen in the Season of Docs.
Don't you think customer empathy should be practiced across the organization and not limited to tech writers or UI and UX professional?
Amazing. Thank you, Fritzen. That's my opinion too. I believe all of us should be focused on customer empathy, because at the end of the day, that's the goal, right? We're all creating something that's the end user is going to use, and we want to ensure that they are having a success story on that side. So yes, and that is definitely somewhere I see the industry moving. I see a lot of that. More and more teams are putting the user at the center of their development. And we are, being that was the core of our job, we are some of the forerunners and advocates for that. And we try to help other teams in ensuring that customer empathy is their core focus as well. Because it helps at the end of the day to create a better product, right? So that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, totally agree with that too. Very good point. Next question we have is come from Sayali. What should we consider if we approach recruitment for technical writing? Minimal qualifications or preferred qualifications?
Thanks, Sayali. That's a great question. I always say it depends on the competitiveness of that space that you're going in. So if you're going to go for the bigger companies that has way more competition, I would say try to exceed the preferred qualification, right? Because there's going to be a lot of competition there. So at that phase, preferred qualification. So that's why I always encourage folks who are coming in newer to the field, less experienced, and so you probably only meet the minimum qualifications, to look at smaller companies and startups and stuff where there might be a little less competition. I know, like on some tools, you can even see the amount of applicants going, although that's still not a good idea of, what's really happening. But yeah, I would always say preferred qualifications is the one that they're looking for, but you can get away with minimal qualifications in some spaces, especially if they're a new company and they, you'll get away with it there. But I would say 90% of the time, look for preferred qualifications.
Does the agile process mean less documentation?
I don't think so. Thanks, Sanjay, for your question. I wouldn't say it means less documentation. I mean, yes, we're incorporated in their process, and so we can capture some stuff during the development and turn that into a product fix, so we don't have to document that later. But I still think that there's gonna, it's just that the type of documentation is probably gonna be different. So we won't have to be creating as much procedural type docs, I feel, once we have a pretty good agile process and we're incorporated with them. But at the end of the day, there's still other areas that we have to provide content for the user in. And what I think agile does, I don't think it creates less documentation, but it allows us to create the documentation that the user needs, rather than documenting the product, if you understand, if you get where I'm going with that, yeah.
Next question is from Vento. Can you also be a tech writer for cryptocurrencies?
Thanks, Vento. Yeah, crypto. Everyone's talking about cryptocurrency these days. Yes, there are definitely writers in fintech, and I see cryptocurrency as just the brand new fancy fintech. What do you call it? Option that's out there now. So yeah, I haven't met a tech writer. That's one thing. I haven't really met a tech writer in that space, but definitely, if it's just an extension of fintech, as I think, yes, there will be tech writers in that space. So yes, this is a good question. I like where you're thinking, because this is the thing. You have to think about the next thing, right? So things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, cryptocurrencies, this is where the world's heading. And so tech writers might be needed in those spaces, and you need to think along that line as well, right? So it's not just the older technologies, but you have to think about the new technologies and how tech writers. So what I would do if I were you is start talking to people in the fintech space and see if you find anyone who is working on tech writing in that space, and then talk to them to see if they know anyone in the cryptocurrency, which would be a subset of that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. All right, coming from Liana, at my company, we ask developers to write the documentation, and the tech writer, we call it tech writing coach, touches it up and publishes it. How much do developers write for you?
Oh, thanks, Lena. So it is, I think in terms, so I would say probably 80% of the time we own the documentation process fully, from planning all the way to the final. We do have instances where you have the developers write some stuff for us, but I would say it's a low percentage of our content that, especially we will let them write things that are more like reference docs, but once it comes around to like the guides and stuff, we tend to own that. But some of our developers really enjoy writing, and we encourage them. And the good thing about it, we have a space that supports that. So they're different depending on how the company is set up, and I'm assuming yours is probably like that since the developers do a lot of that, is that if you have your documentation in a way that makes it easy. So when we used to work in digital, you had less developers wanting to contribute to documentation because they had to learn digital. But now that we write in like Markdown and XML and HTML and all that stuff, it makes it easier for them to contribute because those things come natural to them. So yes, and we do love that, especially when they can come in and contribute to the docs. It actually helps them to improve the product, because when they have to document what they just made and they realize how hard it is to document it, they're like, okay, maybe I could just fix this part of it here so we don't have to write 10 steps here. So yeah, so I hope I answered your question. So it's around, how much around 20% is what I would say.
Jeffrey, do you feel STE does not always convey the intended meaning?
Simplified technical English. I haven't. Hey, Jeffrey. Thanks for this, but I don't think I'm familiar with this term, simplified technical English. If you're available, could you like expand on that a little bit more? Or we could probably circle back. You know what?
We'll go to a different question. Yes. While we wait for him to elaborate. Sayeli, one more question. Is there any difference in growth rate for a tech writer working as an individual versus a tech writer working for a company?
So there was a study that I was looking at in the Society for Technical Communications journal. They didn't cover this, I think, around looking at tech writers who are more on like a contract. They do contract positions and they work with smaller companies, not really smaller companies, but they work on like contracts versus those that work for a company. I haven't seen data for it. So I don't like to talk without having data to back up what I'm going to say, but I wouldn't think there is a major difference, because bigger companies, as they expand their product offerings, will would have an increased need for tech writers. But at the same rate, the economy is growing fast. Companies are popping up every day, and they're going to be creating products that need tech writers that they might not have a full need for a tech writing department, and so they contract out things. So it's hard to assess who's going to grow faster. Is it that new companies are going to pop up faster, or the existing companies are going to push out new products faster? Not sure. I think either way is good. I went through the tech communication program, and I've had classmates who until this day, they still just they don't want to work for big companies. They don't want to work to be fixed in any particular company, and they still do these their individual. They're out there on their own and just work on different contracts, and they're still doing pretty well. So if I can use that as a marker, I would say there's no big difference. Although that might, sorry. I'm hoping to answer that question. As I was looking back at it, I was like, I wonder if you're thinking more of like growing in your career. Because that could be another way to look at that question. Maybe I was answering from growth in the field. It could be growth in the career. And in terms of growth in your career, again, I would say it depends, because when you're out there as an individual, you take on all these different projects and you have to own the entire process from project management to editing, publishing, everything on your own. You become more, you develop more skills, and that you can use to, as you develop those skills, your experience develop, you become a better writer, right? When you're in a company and you're fixed in a role, and it's a big team, and so everybody has, you probably have a project manager separate from you, and they probably have editing tools, so all you're doing is really writing. You might find yourself in a rut after some period of time, and you have to do that extra work to actually get the skills you would get easier if you were out there owning the entire process yourself in a smaller or working on your own. So I think that's another way to look at that. Here we go. Jeffrey's back. Hey.
So ST was used in aerospace.
Oh, it was used in aerospace. I see. Not my field.
And Christina also shared it was developed to help the readers of English language documentation understand what they read, particularly when these readers are non-native English speakers.
I see. See, you learn something new every day. I was not aware of this technology. You said it was developed for aerospace. Okay, that was cool.
How can we get experience without working at any company? Okay. Thanks for your question, Bob.
Oh, thanks, Bob. So experience without working in any company. Again, the best way to do that is through, I know this is hard, but open source. Open source projects is one way of getting experience without being tied to a company. Again, it's voluntary work, so you have to think about that, because you're probably going to be doing all this work and not getting paid. But that's one of the best ways to get some sort of experience in technical writing, is to contribute to open source like that. And remember that even if you're working at a job and it's not technical writing, if there's any way at that job that there's any kind of process that's happening, and you can start documenting that process, and then you can use that, even if it's like a confidential thing and you can't put that in your portfolio, you've just done something, you've documented it, you've had other people use it, you've improved on it. You can make something, you can use the information you have there and make like what do we call that concept? It's like you're taking that content and you would remove the confidential stuff from it, and then put in like a fake product. Say it was a product you were writing about, you put a fake product in. Another way you can also start building out your experience as a writer is to start documenting things around you. I've seen people's portfolios where they explained how to set up, what was it, like a blender, how to put it together and to blend different types of stuff, and what process and what you need to keep in mind when you're doing this or that. And so simple things like that is showing if you can take something that's around you and put it in such a clear manner and concise manner that someone else can pick it up and be like, oh, I think I can actually make this, So there are ways to build out your portfolio. Now, that's not going to get you the 5 years experience that some of these jobs are asking for, but it's a way to build out your portfolio and try to get the entry-level jobs that are probably just asking you for a year experience. They will accept you with these portfolios that you have that's built off of just things that you've put together. So think about that. I know it's a chicken and egg story. It's like you need experience to get a job, you need a job for experience, but it's the best workaround. And again, projects, if you take any kind of courses and it has a project, a capstone project or anything like that, use those as your experience, right? So that's my recommendation there.
Hope that's helpful for you, Vavita. All right, coming from Ashita, how is tech writing different from content writing?
So in terms of, so when you say content writing, that's very broad. So the definition for tech writing is always that it has some key characteristics of it. It is content that is either in the space of what we call scientific or technical, right? And you're taking that content, you're removing the complexities. So there are documents that are written out there about, there's design docs, specification docs, and all of this that are out there about certain technologies. The end user doesn't need that. You have probably, say, a Google Home Assistant, and you don't need to know what's happening under there. There are specifications docs that tell you all of that. You just want to know how to set it up. And that's where tech writing comes in. We're going to take those, we're the ones that go in and read all those technical content, talk with the experts in there, and take the information that we need and make it in such a way that anybody out there who needs to use that product is able to use it using the information we have. And so we remove all the fanciness of the writing out of it. So we're writers, but we're not storytellers. Sometimes we are, depending on if you want to walk people through a procedure. You want to be like, here's where you start, here's your middle, and here's how you end it. But we have certain margins within which we work. It's kind of like we're taking on this and we're making it in a way that the end user can just get it to do what they need to do effectively right away. I feel like content writing is very broad. You could be writing about anything, and it could, and the level, I guess I would say the level of the, although that kind of, I take that back, because I want to say it depends on the audience. Again, that's for technical writing too, because sometimes we write highly technical content if our audience is a highly technical audience, right? So if you're writing for a developer audience, it's going to be different if you're writing for the general audience. But yeah, I think you just need to understand the markers of tech writing is about having content that at the end of the day, somebody is able to just get something done without the complexities of the thing. So that's how I look at tech writing.
And what is your opinion about UX writing, and how is that different compared to traditional tech writing for software?
Oh, thanks, Pritam. So UX writing, they're the ones that tend to write within the product, right? So UX writers, let me backtrack. In some companies, there's no difference between a UX writer and a tech writer. I've seen companies where, based on their job description, I looked at it, I was like, that's both a UX writer and a tech writer. In other companies, there's a clear distinction. And when there's a clear distinction, how it works is that UX writers tend to be more focused on writing within the product. So if you have a cell phone, which most of us have, any text that's inside on the screen, inside the settings or whatever, that's where your UX writer, would come in. So they work within the product. So if it's a software and has a user interface, and your user interface is going to have text living in there, you need somebody to come in and make sure that the content there is accurate, and it's accurately describing the thing, and it has the right design or whatever, the right style, wrong word, the right style for the product. That's where your UX writer comes in. A tech writer, our content tends to live outside of the product. So we write the guides that live outside of the product, right? So so there's that kind of difference. So we have a different writing style. So for example, as a tech writer, we're more wordier. I've written something recently. One of my developers came to me and he wanted something fixed in the product itself. And I wrote something and the UX writer came and was like, oh, the tech writer did this. Like, yeah, just like, let's cut this down to like 10 words because this has to fit on the screen. So those are kind of some of the minor differences between UX writing and tech writing. But sometimes you find yourself doing both, right? So.
All right, and I think this is the last question that we have coming from Saili. So from your experience, Shawnique, in the field, how has technical writing compared to now, compared to recent years, how that has changed?
How has it changed? In terms of, I think I needed a little bit more on that. In terms of, so I'm going to answer what I think it is, and hopefully that's it. So technical writing has been around as a profession, I would say, from probably the late 70s. And I'm going to be honest, from then until now, it's a field that hasn't changed much in terms of what we do. And that I was at a conference recently, and that was one of the talk that was given was like, technical writing is ripe for transformation. We've been doing the same thing for the last how many years as writers. in some regards. But I would say we have, our tools have improved and all of that, but we still, at the end of the day, just give people guides that they have to read through and get things done. Someone was saying, with all this modern technology and AI and stuff, why haven't we figured out a way that just give them what they want when they want it and nothing else, right? And so it's a field. So that's one of the good things about it. I don't know, for me, I look at that as a plus, is that it's a field that has so much opportunity in it now for innovation. And so if you come in and you get the basics of it, you could be that champion of change, right, in that space. And we're doing it little by little in different companies, in different spaces, on different teams. We are reimagining what we think technical writing should look like and how we can contribute to the development of features and products, etc., without having those heavy books. Because even though we've moved away from PDFs or books that people walked around as guides and put them online now, they haven't really changed much in terms of the layout, the structure, what it is. And so it's definitely a field that is ripe for that, for innovation. And so if you're that type of person who loves a challenge and is ready to see change, this is one of those fields that, you know, the opportunities are there.
All right, I think that's a wrap. Well, thank you so much, Shawnique, for joining us today. Great insights and tips as well. Hope you all found it super helpful, especially for those who are looking into a career into technical writing. And with that, we will wrap our Elevate session for today. So we'd like to thank you all for joining. We hope you enjoy the sessions, and hopefully you'll be able to incorporate some of the learnings into your professional career and take it to the next level. Big thank you to our speakers again, Caitlin and Shawnique as well. And also, we'd like to kindly request for you to fill out the feedback survey in the follow-up email or the link that we shared on the screen so that we can continue to improve the program along the way. And upon completion for each of the feedback surveys, you'll be able to obtain a certificate of participation for each theme. We will also be sharing the links to all the slides for each session, and as well as the recording in the follow-up email. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at elevate-team@google.com. We're looking forward to seeing you next month. Till then, take care and have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.